I'm Brandon Amoroso, and this is the D2Z podcast, building and growing your business from a Gen Z perspective. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to D2Z, a podcast about using the Gen Z mindset to grow your business. I'm Gen Z entrepreneur Brandon Amoroso, founder and president of Retention as a Service Agency, Electric. And today I'm joined by Carter Snyder, associate director of the Sasha Group. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So before we hop into some of the discussion topics today, can you give everybody just a quick background on yourself and also like what the Sasha Group is?
Yeah, sure, of course. So about myself, I've been at a number of VaynerX companies. Have worked at VaynerMedia for a few years, servicing mostly Fortune 100 businesses. Moved over to the Sasha Group, which is another company within the VaynerX Holding Co. Originally, designed for more challenger brands, a range of small to medium-sized businesses and kind of up to larger businesses. Full service ad agency on both ends, both at VaynerMedia and Sasha Group, specifically focusing on all ranges of media from social, digital, e-commerce, etc.
What are some of the types of clients that you are typically working with?
Yeah, so on the VaynerMedia side, generally it's mostly Fortune 100, everything from large beverage and CPG clients to financial services and brick and mortar stores. So it really ranges there. And then at the Sasha Group, it generally skews a bit smaller. Can be everything from B2B software to traditional CPG clients, etc. So full service, quite a range of clients. So it really just depends on the business needs. A lot of the things that we focus on are, building brands, growing sales, etc. Everything that you'll typically find within full service agency.
And what would you say is the biggest transition for you coming from, I guess my one question would be, what has it been like being at, a company for a longer period of time than I would say, you see a lot during COVID, so much hopping around, but you've been able to climb the ladder at Vayner rather quickly. What are some of the, pros versus cons of that continuity? Because, there's obviously some people who literally change jobs every 3 months, but then what I think is more preferred is staying longer.
Yeah, so I've been with VaynerX since 2018, a bit over 5 years now. Started as an analyst and grew up to my current role. I'd say the continuity, even within different companies in the same holding co, has allowed for just a bit of the beliefs of Gary himself and other people in the organization to really seep through, and kind of the ethos of the organization has remained constant while the world and kind of the retail and social landscape has changed around us. So while a lot of our strategies have pivoted, the ethos and kind of the mindset of what we're set out to do and even the human element of the companies remain the same. When I joined, we were around 500 to 600 people, I believe, and now scaled up to almost 2,000 globally and expand across offices, et cetera, regions as well. So I think while a lot has changed in terms of scaling the business and being a very small part of that, there's been a lot that's remained the same as well, and probably part of the reason why we have been able to grow so rapidly.
Yeah, I think it's important for places to be able to provide that level of flexibility in role, and so that it's not just the same thing over and over again. But I think that the industry as a whole lends itself to that anyways, because there's always things that are constantly changing. If you were still doing the same things that you did when you came out of school working at Vayner, you would be wildly unsuccessful at this exact moment in time.
Yeah, and I think one of the nice things about where I found myself is people change, teams, departments, companies within the organization pretty regularly. It's not uncommon to have quite a few folks who've worked at multiple different companies within the overall agency, people who've switched departments. A lot of the function and kind of overarching belief of what we're doing is the same, but people kind of bumped around a little bit, and I view that more as a strength than anything else.
Yeah, and that, I mean, at least at Electric, those were the types of team members that we were trying to find and hire and elevate. And the ones that were willing to hop into a bunch of different areas and try different things. But to get more specific around, media, especially in 2023, what are some of the things that you're seeing work that, maybe historically did not work? And also, what are some of the things that were working really well for you during COVID that are not working anymore?
Yeah, I think there's two big things at the forefront right now of the media landscape that I'm seeing is number one, changes in media consumption, just on the end of the consumer, which that's not necessarily new, but it's just kind of ever evolving, and we can dig into that in a little bit. And then the other side is the rapid expansion of some of the kind of e-commerce, e-retail platforms. Things like Walmart or Amazon, even with some of their capabilities rapidly expanding, and a lot of demand on the advertising side against that, which I know is a bit more in your wheelhouse. But with things like changing media consumption, we're looking at the divide between traditional and digital media, starting with things like newspaper and print coming out of the fold, and TV coming in, and then now as people move away from traditional or linear TV and into streaming, we're seeing some differences there. And then on the other side of that as well, looking at the expansion of social. That's nothing new. When social media came in, obviously it took a lot of time away from people consuming traditional media, but even now we see a lot of apps in flux. So TikTok's rise has taken market share away from Facebook, and now even today, YouTube and TikTok are sitting right about 46 minutes a day in 2022 of average time spent for individual users, likely to kind of expand this year in 23, which is all kind of to say us as advertisers have to stay on top of the consumption landscape, not necessarily vilifying, say, print ads as a place to be, but having to understand kind of the deeper nuances of what people are consuming content on, where we can appear natively and authentically, and just the best space to find business results.
The metrics around time spent on TikTok are crazy and also horrifying. Like, if you look at your screen time report too, I mean, for me, it's more so Instagram, but those things will just suck you in and keep you there for a while.
Yeah, I think there was a week that I was on vacation that I got the notification that my screen time was down 80% week over week, and I couldn't have been more proud. So yeah, it's sort of designed that way. The algorithms have changed a lot from originally being social platforms where you're sharing photos with close family, friends, etc., to now more of kind of entertainment platforms. TikTok looks a lot more like YouTube than Instagram did when it first came out. Originally, they were kind of designed for, like I mentioned, just small scale sharing or seeing what your friends or kind of relatives were up to, and now it's much more a discovery platform. There's some stats coming out saying that platforms like TikTok, Instagram, et cetera, are being used by Gen Z as more of a search function. So people looking up recipes or tips for vacations, things like that. So there's a lot of discovery that's allowed for kind of this shift in kind of consumption. And there's some opportunities for arbitrage for brands or people to appear authentically, but also get in front of potential consumers. So something that we talked about a bit is finding like attention arbitrage or underpriced attention. So when TikTok first had come into the market, just based on supply and demand, there was a vast supply of inventory and of time spent, but a lot of advertisers were very hesitant, either for brand safety reasons when TikTok came to be, or just a first mover problem that people didn't want to be the first ones to move, or clients had struggles in approving plans, and ultimately it allowed for some people, and especially the first movers in the ad space, to really capture a lot of underpriced inventory. And even from an organic presence, some companies or individuals were kind of the first ones making a presence there, and they were able to grow up their following or kind of drive results.
Yeah, the stats around TikTok taking over Google in terms of search and discovery, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I don't do it, but family, friends, and those I would say, teenage years and younger, they go to TikTok to search for restaurants, or they go to TikTok to search for anything. They don't go to Google anymore to look for stuff. And they're also consuming the content in the short form video format versus, I love my first page of Google results and text-based results.
Yeah, and for a consumer standpoint too, you're downloading a lot more information in a short clip with multiple, I'll use your example of a restaurant, for instance. We probably go to Google and then Yelp and then scroll through some photos or whatnot. Whereas if I can watch 2 or 3 reels or TikToks of a certain restaurant, you're probably seeing 5 to 10 different dishes, the kind of vibe of the restaurant, the interior design, all that. So as a consumer of the content, you're probably able to download a bit more information in a shorter period of time. So I think it makes sense on both sides what people are doing. And then just moving over to kind of the brand aspect of it, I think the big thing is, finding that niche and finding what's happening organically on the platforms and appearing somewhat authentically. So that's not to say that the shakeup in the media landscape is necessarily a problem, but it's just finding an individual's place and how people are consuming content. Success on an Instagram ad or success on the open web is super variable from what we're seeing success with on TikTok. So I think a lot of the things that we just talked about now in terms of what's resonating with people, what they're going to the platforms for, et cetera, is super important to kind of understand and acknowledge, especially when having a strategy for your presence, be it paid or organically.
When you're onboarding with a new client, what do you look at to determine, the media mix across all of these various channels? Because you have like the big players like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, but then you obviously have Pinterest, you have Twitter, X, whatever it's being called now, etc. How do you determine, how you allocate budgets or which platforms you don't even touch entirely?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different variables. One is most obvious, just the size of the client and what they're kind of capable of spending. That'll be the first thing that probably may make you consider certain things or exclude certain things. So that's a good starting point, just understanding someone's budget, and then second to that, their business goals. So if their goals are more kind of upper funnel or kind of awareness driven, you may shift more towards a certain platform. You may shift more towards, let's say, CTV or TV, or certain social platforms where they're very good for awareness. They have low CPMs. You can have efficient reach or scale, but they're not that great at converting. Historically, I think that's been one of TikTok's biggest challenges, and something that they've been working towards is how do we become better at converting people. So now you're seeing movement within a lot of different social platforms of having shopping resources or having different down funnel success. So I think that's the big kind of movement. And then also understanding a few different things like what sort of data do they have at their disposal? How robust is your first party data? What's your existing marketing funnel looking like? And how can we take advantage of that? So there's a lot of things to consider, rooted in mostly client business goals, and just I think the first step is taking a bit of a comprehensive approach to understanding what's currently being done, what's their strategy, what's working, what's not, and maybe finding some things that they hadn't previously thought of.
How do you balance working in and with an existing team and like being able to, push through your strategy and ideas without, stepping on toes and having there be this conflict between external agency and like internal resources?
Yeah, I think it's a fine balance, and definitely there's a need for compassion everywhere. The big thing, and I think something that's been preached within our organization was, hey, at the end of the day, you've been hired for a reason. Whether it's through a pitch process or from a kind of long-standing relationship, there's a certain trust and reliance that you're the expert in what you're hired to do. So there kind of is that realization. That's a tougher conversation, I think, of, hey, give us a little leeway or give us some separation. So that's one side of the coin, but I think the other is just through education, through compassion. Obviously, no idea that's jammed down someone's throat is going to be a success. I think there needs to be a little bit of more conversational education to go on of, hey, this is our strategy. Here's what we're seeing in the market. Here's what we're seeing work for other people in your industry. And here's why do we think it can be successful. So I think there's a little bit of a deeper approach there. But at the most fundamental level, I think, you are the subject matter expert that's been hired for a certain reason. So I think, just following through with a lot of your ideas. Now, at sometimes there's regulatory burdens or there's red tape within organizations or industries that prevent you from, executing exactly what you want. And that's a different scenario. But for the most part, I think it's just, good collaboration.
Yeah, I think that realizing that you are the expert is super important, because we've had team members in the past who they might say the right things, but they don't say them in the right way, and then it leaves the client to second guess, even if what they're saying is completely valid and actually a great idea or strategy. Yeah, like I said before, you could literally lie as long as you say it confidently. And that would actually land better than if you say something that's true, but you say it in a way that it almost is posed as a question, or it seems like you're not being assertive or know what you're talking about necessarily.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with general preparation as well. Whether it's something as comprehensive as overall strategy or a yearly plan, like you were talking about, or as simple as delivering a reporting call or something. I always had told people, you should be able to deliver this report without actually looking at the data during the call. You maybe not every fine detail, but you should have a good understanding of like what you're trying to deliver, the message you're trying to get across, and the key takeaways. And I think some of that preparation ultimately takes the burden off a bit of that communication, because you're not glancing at your notes. You're not really reliant on support from others. I think the strength in communication that comes from both knowledge and preparation, but also kind of the confidence in what you're saying, doing your homework, having a few, case studies or examples on hand to kind of push your thoughts is really crucial.
Yeah, the prior preparation definitely goes a long way in making sure that you're presenting a good front when dealing with the client. I want to talk a little bit about the transition for you from individual contributor to having to oversee a team, and what are some of the things that you've learned along the way, things that you expected and went well, and things that maybe haven't gone well, as like a lot of the people listening here have to make that step in their career, or are currently dealing with having to manage other people and not solely being responsible just for their end work product.
Yeah, certainly. So I think the number one thing is, generally people don't understand the full extent of, managing people, even on a small scale. There's been times where, working on a project and just managing one person versus managing an entire team. I think for a lot of young people who may just be entering the industry, and like ourselves, the goal was, learn as much as possible when you get in the door, provide as much value to your team, to your bosses, to kind of whoever, support anyone in any way. And a lot of that, especially entering a kind of industry fresh, is just learn as much as I possibly can. And then moving into a little bit more of kind of a managerial role at times, that learning component doesn't really change. I think especially in the industry we're in, because the landscape is changing around us. So complacency is really, really tough. So you still need to balance that. But on the other side of kind of learning and education, you need to learn about managing people, but also individual people within your team. There's a lot of different working styles. My working style is largely different from a lot of other people. So just understanding that as you shift from kind of more micro focused on execution when you're an individual contributor, to more focusing on kind of macro business goals, the team as a whole, organizational management, that sort of stuff. So a big thing for me is, working to, as best as possible, provide the guardrails for kind of team members, especially, folks that may be junior members of the team, without overly, inundating them with information or requirements or kind of red tape. Really, I think providing the swim lanes and kind of guiding people where necessary has been one of the most beneficial things for me.
What are some of the ways that you've had to deal with, team members who maybe aren't putting in the full effort or, actually delivering, because at least in my experience, I've been much more on the side of second chances, third chances, etc. But at a certain point, the chances have to run out, and there has to be an actual end work product and results. And how do you, sort of sift through that and not get taken advantage of, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's your responsibility and your issue if they don't perform, but then still provide ability to improve.
Yeah, I would say, as someone who may not always have, let's say, and certainly does not have final decision making, I think with any team or organization, when there's a problem, the first thing is, it sounds relatively straightforward, but dissecting the why. Is it an effort issue? Is it a knowledge issue? Just sort of getting to the bottom of that, because I think it's a lot easier to fix once you kind of understand the root cause. And something too, not even when there's an issue, but more so just on a general basis. I think for a manager, I've always appreciated it coming down to me, and I've tried to kind of carry on with that is a very simple question of, how can I help you? What can I either clarify or provide? What context do you maybe not have that you haven't been looped into that I may have through different meetings or information that may have not worked its way down the ladder, and what can I do to help you? Generally, that candid conversation, if it's a strong employee, will help bring a lot of things to light, especially now in kind of the age where a lot of things are siloed, or maybe if you're not in the office all the time, there's some information that doesn't always move around the ways in which it possibly could. I think that just candor and openness in terms of a conversation generally goes a long way.
Yeah, I think people just tend to overcomplicate things when, more often than not, you'd be better off just treating it as if it's like a regular old like human interaction or conversation, and remove the fact that it is work from the equation. And the right thing to do, or the obvious thing to do, is very, it's not complicated, but it, like, at least when I first started, I didn't have some of those conversations that would have been very easy to have, and would have addressed a lot of issues, or help me better support the team in achieving what their goals are. Because one of the biggest realizations for me is that, like, not everybody has the same goals. It sounds kind of stupid saying it now, but my original thought was that everybody wanted to be a manager, everybody wanted more responsibility, everybody wanted to work more, and that's just not the reality.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too, especially for junior members of teams or people that may be listening that are just entering the workforce, is don't be afraid to ask questions. I think it's also a cliche, but there's a difference between asking a question in which you could very easily find out from Google or through a few minutes of work, be able to demonstrate, hey, I completed this task, I solved a problem, I worked through this spreadsheet. But if it's a more comprehensive or complicated problem that's presenting a barrier to you being able to complete your day's work, and it may just be a quick answer from your manager, and then that opens the gates to you being able to move forth, please do. I think there's a little bit of a hesitancy from junior members sometimes that they either A, don't want to feel like a burden on others, or B, don't want to kind of make it known at times that they may be questioning something. So I think the transparency that you can create, especially as a manager, to open that up is really valuable as well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So hopping back into the media side of things, if you were like a new brand starting today, what are the 3 things that you're going to be doing with them first, and why?
The 3 things. I think from a new brand, I think you really have to evaluate, what your niche is, what your place is in the market. I think especially now with tons of brands populating lots and lots of different social platforms. It's tough to be on all of them. So finding your niche and finding what you need to double down on is really important. That's more of a kind of test and learn situation. So just evaluating your business or service and finding what your kind of core market of people are, where they're consuming content, where they're engaging with, and where you can reach them. So that's a little bit more high level. I think the second thing, especially as we're seeing, CPAs generally rise, a lot of customer acquisition is kind of under the headlight, and that's being increasingly more difficult. I think you really need to evaluate your kind of first party data strategy, especially for kind of new to semi-experienced businesses that may have a tough time with converting customers using, website retargeting or first party data lists, or using all of the data at your disposal where possible is really, really valuable, especially if you don't have a lot of money to, build your brand. You don't have a ton of brand awareness, and you may not be able to scale with ads. Finding niches in the market where you can get some underpriced attention or capture on the attention you already have is probably really valuable. And the third thing, and this is something that is much more in I think your wheelhouse historically than mine, is just evaluating that tech stack, because outside of media, as someone who is very, very focused on media in the day-to-day, I know for new brands and small brands especially, media comes later. Things like working through your email messaging or your SMS or your kind of web design, and working with some of that low-hanging fruit is probably most important. I think, a lot of the clients that we've worked with have been a bit more established, and have had the fortune of having a pretty good tech stack, lots of data at their disposal, et cetera, et cetera. That probably would be a somewhat less intuitive, but good recommendation, which I'm sure is an exercise that you've likely worked through with lots of your clients that have entered the market.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, at least when it comes to the tech stack, you have sort of two buckets that aren't great places to be in. You have, small businesses who are just getting started out, who try to get the Ferrari of tech stacks, and so they have 40 different solutions, and they're all locked up to these annual contracts, and they don't actually have anybody to deploy or take these tech stack products and make them successful. There is maybe one app that you can download and it'll just automatically, start generating ROI for you. And the first thing I look at is loyalty programs, because there's so many brands that have that stupid little widget in the bottom left corner of their website, sign up and, like us on Facebook and you'll get 25 points and all this other stuff. And it's like, who's actually doing this as a customer? And then is it integrated at all into your customer journey? And the answer is no and no. And so then you have a small brand who is spending, far more money on tech than they are on internal team and resources. But then on the flip side, you got massive companies who have Frankenstein tech stacks who, it's just it's a wildly different way of working when you're in a company who, is Fortune 500, or, it just has so many stakeholders and so much bias and entrenched thoughts and ideas around how things should be. And those are the two that I try to avoid at all costs if I'm, working with a brand, or at least helping them, avoid that. And they both require different approaches to fixing. Yeah. I've never had an engagement before where it's great idea, but we're going to slot that in for Q3 of next year, because we're going to have to go fight this battle. Then we're going to have to go get buy-in from, John, Jimmy, and Carla, or whatever, just making them names at this point. And then, it's just crazy. I'm so used to, I just want to be able to do it. And that's something that I'm trying to, desperately avoid in any of the companies I have, is just this paralysis analysis, so to speak. Let's just test it and let the data, show whether or not it's working or not. And especially at that size too, you can put a lot of the lift on the tech partner, because they want your logo and they want to work with you.
Yeah, I think just building off a couple of your points on the larger business side, urgency is kind of key. Being able to move at the speed of the market, and getting out and testing and learning. There's a saying which has been thrown around a bit in my world recently, that post-it's better than perfect, because by the time that there's 4 rounds of review, or there's feedback from quite a few people, you may have missed your mark. As we well know, memes come and go in a matter of days, and if you're 2 or 3 days late, sometimes engagement kind of goes by the wayside. That's not to say that you should just be moving forth with careless abandon, but I think there's a certain fine line between overindulging oneself in review processes, et cetera, and also being careless. So I think finding that balance and kind of work within one's individual organization is key. And then especially for the small business side, you talked a little bit about retention offers, or specific programs to encourage people with discounts, et cetera. I think being kind of weary of that shiny object in the corner, whether that's, hey, this is going to drive you 10x ROAS off the go, or hey, your loyalty program, you should offer a 50% discount on the first order. That's the key to retention and driving your business. I think anyone that's pushing those kind of overarching and very kind of generalized statements, it's a little weary. We've obviously been in the world in which that 50% first offer is very, very good at getting you initial sales, driving down your kind of your revenue on that first order and your margins, and then people are immediately backing out. So I think creating a strategy in which you're kind of settled for the long term, and avoiding those shiny objects is key as well for small biz. Let your product come through and shine, provide value to people, and be patient.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important to have, an internal stakeholder who's responsible for general, business metrics, or to work with an agency who is one their like North Star is not, what's the cheapest CPA we can get, or what's the best in-platform ROAS, because then you end up doing stupid shit like 90% off your first subscription order, and yeah, you get customers to buy it for like $10 on Facebook, but they're all trash, and then you just have an absolute nightmare of a leaky bucket.
Yeah.
And so you really need somebody who is put to task to do the things that are actually objectively right for the business, that can dig into cohort analysis, that isn't looking for the cheap way out with some sort of like sampling program where like obviously you're going to acquire a bunch of customers if you give them a product for $1, but what have you actually accomplished?
Yeah, I think the big thing is finding the right balance of short-term success and long-term brand growth. And that's different for every business, because some you can probably offer at a higher discount and you have better, retention, but it's not always the case for certain businesses. So understanding that balance between offering people something in short-term success and kind of brand growth. So for instance, I briefly mentioned earlier, there's a huge growth in terms of retail media. So in the last year, and kind of in 2020, Walmart and Amazon's ad sales growth is growing at 4 and 8x of Meta. Obviously, a little bit of that comes to play with new to market entry. They're obviously growing at a higher rate because it's kind of new, but all of the big players are kind of investing in retail media at this point. The Trade Desk is partnered up with Roundel, who services Target. They've partnered up with Walmart. Amazon also, has lots of Whole Foods data. So there's a huge push into kind of retail media. And at this point, the largest thing that I'm seeing is focusing on incrementality. So it's very easy to see, brands or kind of retail platforms saying, hey, we're going to drive 10x ROAS. And the big question is, what's the incrementality of that? And, how can I support short-term, sales goals with long-term brand growth? And that's just an extension, I think, of the promo offers that you've chatted briefly about. But there's certainly a lot to kind of dig into, and something that it seems you've been very, very focused on is kind of building brands for the long term, and really being focused on providing a good product, providing a good service, and being a bit patient with some of the growth, and just relying on kind of what you're providing.
So I got one final question for you here before we wrap up. What are you most excited about for the rest of this year going into next year?
What am I most excited about? That's a good question. I think the media landscape is kind of at a very interesting point, partially because there's a lot of kind of moving parts. Streaming is surging, and now it's going to be surpassing traditional TVs. Different social platforms are in flux. You're seeing lots of things come and go very, very quickly. So things like Threads, which made a absolute surge, and I think surpassed the record for quickest 100 million installs or something of the sort, and then has sort of taken a dip, and platforms like Be Real or different things that we've kind of seen come up in flares is just kind of the evolution of what people are consuming, and what that means for kind of brands and advertisers, both to drive business results, but show up authentically as well. So I think it's just a critical juncture where there's so many options vying for people's attention, where that previously hadn't been the case. It always was in terms of, let's say, different radio stations or TV channels or et cetera. But there's more than just channels. There's a lot of different mediums. There's a lot of different options, let's say, for consumers to kind of spend their time and engage with stuff. So that's really, really interesting. And I think the democratization of that means less big brands and more like individual creators being able to make a lot of money and working with brands or different things like that. So I think the nimbleness and agility needs to be at an all-time high when there's way more channels in which companies and businesses can kind of engage with their consumers. So that's something that's fascinating to me, and is likely to be kind of ever changing in years to come.
Yeah, and it's like, having that mindset of constantly testing and getting stuck on one way, but then also at the same time knowing when to go super deep and go all in on a particular, channel or campaign that is working very well. I think, both are important. At least for me, I can tend to get very distracted. So, it's a blessing and a curse, having all these new things that are coming out. Like, you want to test them, but then also making sure that you actually go very deep into one or two areas versus trying to do 30 different things and you're just doing all of them very mediocre.
Yeah, I think doubling down on what works and testing what's new or what you haven't maybe experienced or explored in the past is very, very important. And now more than ever, with everything pushing towards digital and kind of the ever evolving data landscape, a lot of the privacy regulations, et cetera, there's definitely a need for a solid understanding of what's actually driving business results and what may not be. So I think that complicates things a bit. But like you said, relying on kind of what works and what's historically worked, while always testing, always evolving, and kind of staying within the times is something that's very valuable.
Yeah, well, analytics and attribution are another absolute nightmare that we can avoid for this. Otherwise I'll just go on a rant of complaining for the next 25 minutes. But thank you so much for joining us. Before we hop off, can you let everybody know where they can contact you, get in touch with you online?
Yeah, on LinkedIn would be the best place, Carter Snyder, and then I'm sure you can find a suite of my company and kind of the holding company at different handles, the Sasha Group, VaynerX, VaynerMedia, etc. But yeah, that's the best place for me.
Awesome. Again, thanks for coming on. For everybody listening, as always, I'm Brandon Amoroso. You can find me at brandonamoroso.com or electricmarketing.com, and we will see you next time.